Welcome, everyone. If you're looking for an unforgettable tale of courage, redemption, and the unbreakable spirit of justice, you have come to the right place. In this story, a young rancher's daughter is ambushed and cruelly tied to a fence post, only to be rescued by a silent stranger. With lightning-quick reflexes and a mysterious past, their worlds collide in a single moment of desperation, setting off a chain of events that will change an entire valley forever. But who is this silent protector? And what drives him to risk everything for a young woman he's never met? And can these two unlikely allies triumph over a ruthless gang and a corrupt lawman? Tune in to find out how raw determination and a shared sense of purpose can bring down even the most powerful enemies. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, like this video, and ring that notification bell so you never miss another thrilling story. Your support helps us bring you more inspiring tales just like this one. They found her at sunrise, bruised and bound to a weathered fence post at the outskirts of Brightwater Valley. Lola Townsend, daughter of Randolph Townsend, the only ranch owner bold enough to oppose the Crossley gang, had been left under the open Wyoming sky as a warning. The Crossleys figured that by breaking the young woman, they'd break her father's resolve and tighten their grip on the territory for good. Yet fate had other plans. At the very moment Lola thought all hope was lost, a lone rider emerged from the morning haze. Gunnar Jameson, a drifter with piercing gray eyes and a silence that had endured for 15 years. He didn't speak to her, but his actions were swift and sure. He cut away the ropes, digging into her skin, and in one smooth movement turned his guns on the thugs who dared linger nearby, delivering retribution like lightning. 3 of them ended up in the dirt before they could mount a decent defense, and the rest of the Crossley riders scattered, unwilling to face his uncanny aim. Lola collapsed into his arms, still in shock, her injuries severe enough to cause her vision to blur. Half conscious, she could only recall the cruelty she'd suffered, the coarse laughter, the sour stench of old whiskey on their breath, and the rope chafing her wrists. She remembered her father's ranch, a proud spread called Townsend Acres, where the local hands worked with unwavering loyalty. She remembered the sign near the homestead arch that read Townsend Pride, though now everything seemed overshadowed by the blood and fear the Crossleys had brought. As her world tilted and darkness threaded her vision, she felt Gunnar's steady grip lift her onto his horse. He was a man of few words, none at all actually, but he carried himself with a precision that spoke volumes. By the time they reached Dr. Whitaker's small whitewashed clinic in Brightwater, Lola had slipped into a troubled unconsciousness. The doctor, a tall, graying man known for his gentle touch and relentless dedication, recognized her instantly. He worked quickly, assisted by his daughter Lily Whitaker, who hummed a lullaby under her breath as she cleaned the gashes on Lola's arms. Outside, townsfolk who happened to be up early peered through the dusty windows. Eyes widened at the sight of the battered young woman. A rumor flitted through the gathering that the Crossleys had finally gone too far by harming the daughter of their biggest adversary. Another rumor took shape as well, that the silent man who brought her in was a legendary ex-Texas Ranger, or maybe something else entirely. Stories about a quiet stranger with a haunted past had circulated before. Some said he'd lost everything 15 years back and hadn't uttered a word since. When Lola's father, Randolph, stormed into the clinic soon after, his face was a mask of rage and fear. He saw the bruises on his daughter, heard the muted updates from Dr. Whitaker about her condition, and vowed revenge. "I'll kill every last one of those Crossley dogs," he snarled, fists trembling. But the doctor, though sympathetic, cautioned him to let Lola heal and to think before acting. Randolph, the doctor, warned the Crossleys thrive on men rushing headlong into feuds. If you take them on alone, you'll end up shot dead and your ranch lost. While the 2 men argued in hushed tones, Lily brought a bowl of warm water to wipe the blood and dirt from Lola's face, glancing every so often at the tall figure standing quietly by the door. Gunnar Jameson hadn't moved since bringing Lola in, and he hadn't made a sound. He just stood there watching a presence, both comforting and deeply unsettling. From across the dusty street, folks could see him leaning against the hitching post, his rifle balanced at his side. The 3 dead Crossley men out by the fence post were proof enough of his skill and willingness to fight. But who was he truly? Sheriff Abbott, the local law in name only, had shown little inclination to rein in the Crossley gang in the past. Everyone knew he'd probably turn a blind eye even to a brutal assault like Lola's. Another name, Marshall Sutter, began to surface in whispered conversations, a federal man with a questionable reputation, rumored to have a network of corrupt underlings scouring the territory for a so-called ghost who hunted lawmen gone bad. The tension in Brightwater sharpened by the hour. And in the midst of it all, Gunnar Jameson remained silent. Yet his silence spoke louder than a dozen boastful men. 3 days later, while Lola convalesced in Dr. Whitaker's clinic, Gunnar Jameson set up a small camp on a rocky outcrop overlooking Townsend Acres. By day, he carved small figurines from spare pieces of wood, the scrape of his knife audible only to the hawks circling overhead. By night, he watched alert to every flicker of the bunkhouse lanterns below. He scarcely slept and never built his fire large enough to draw unwanted attention. From that vantage, he noted that Randolph Townsend had doubled the number of ranch hands who carried rifles. He saw men posted at every fence line scanning for signs of the Crossleys. Fear crackled in the air like thunder before a storm. It was near dusk when one of the Townsend hands, Joshua West, rode up the slope on his mare, breath steaming in the cooling air. A wiry fellow with bright brown eyes, Joshua tried to hide his unease at approaching Gunnar. He cleared his throat and said, "Sir, Townsend asked if you'd join us for supper, sir. Miss Lola's on her feet some, and she's been asking about you." Gunnar didn't respond right away. Instead, he reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small wooden sculpture of a horse intricately carved. Handing it to Joshua with a curt nod, he made it clear that was all the answer he'd give Joshua. Carefully tucking the carving into a pouch on his belt, shifted in his saddle. "Folks say you used to be a ranger," he ventured. "That you rode under the Texas Star before you stopped talking, but there's been trouble in town." Marshal Sutter's men were seen riding through, heard they're looking for someone who's been killing crooked lawmen. Gunnar's shoulders stiffened, though his gaze never left the horizon. Joshua swallowed him, then continued. "They claim the Crossleys didn't actually mean to harm Lola. Saeed, you staged the whole rescue to pick them off in cold blood, claimed you were some kind of vigilante." At that, Gunnar gave the slightest turn of his head, eyes blazing like steel against a flint. Joshua quickly shook his head. "We don't believe it. Mr. Townsend told me to say so. But there's talk that this marshal's got a file on you, something about a massacre from 15 years ago." Sliding a folded piece of yellowed paper from his shirt pocket, Joshua held it out with trembling fingers. The words at the top were faint but readable. U.S. Marshal's Office, Broken Mesa Massacre, 15 years ago. Gunnar stared at the document, his jaw set. Then he glanced at Joshua, expression unyielding. The next moment, distant hoofbeats shattered the silence, and both men moved as though guided by the same instinct. Gunnar kicked dirt over his tiny fire, plunging them into near darkness. They ducked behind a large boulder, straining to make out voices in the gloaming. A trio of riders appeared, each with a cocked rifle. Their silhouettes were visible against the lavender sky. "This is where that quiet bastard's been camping." One of them muttered, "Marshal Sutter wants him alive if possible. Dead if we can't manage that." Gunnar's hand tightened on Joshua's arm, a silent command to stay down. The riders inspected the dim embers of the doused campfire. "Still warm," another said. "They can't have gone far." For a moment it seemed they might discover the two men's hiding place, but a sudden bark from the Townsend ranch below diverted their attention. "Let's check the ranch," the leader commanded. "He'll come out eventually, they always do." When the riders were gone, Gunnar helped Joshua to his feet. Moonlight revealed a flicker of pure terror in the younger man's eyes. Gunnar pressed the folded paper back into Joshua's hand. His message was clear, without him voicing a single syllable. "Keep this safe, tell no one yet." Then in a fluid motion, Gunnar mounted his horse and headed off into the shadows, as silent as he'd arrived. Joshua lingered, hugging the little wooden horse, close torn between relief and dread. He glanced down to see the ranch below, sparking to life with lanterns, the outlines of armed men pacing the perimeter. Something akin to a warning bell clanged in the center of Brightwater. Or maybe it was just the wind through the church steeple. One thing was certain. A new storm was about to break over the valley. Lola's nightmares had a recurring theme, the coarse rope biting into her wrists, her back against the fence post, the mocking eyes of her captors. The phantom pain woke her on the third night in Dr. Whitaker's care. She rose from the cot, ignoring the pang in her ribs, determined to see something besides the clinic walls. With careful steps, she navigated the hallway and emerged into the cool night air. Brightwater's main street lay quiet except for a lone lantern swaying outside the saloon. The flicker of that light cast long shadows on the dusty road, adding an eerie hush to the town. Finding her father in the clinic's small kitchen, she saw he was not alone. Joshua West leaned against a table, a wooden horse clutched in his hands. Spread out beside him was the piece of paper from the night before the old case. File Marshal Sutter wants to bring him in, Joshua said as Lola quietly approached. Claims Gunnar Jameson's been killing men with badges, all of whom had connections to outlaws. It started right after that massacre 15 years ago. Lola touched her split lip, feeling the memory of the beating surge back. Could it be that Gunnar had lost someone once the same way she'd nearly lost her own life? Was that what drove him to hunt down crooked lawmen? I don't care if he's the devil himself, Randolph Townsend announced from the threshold. Face grim, he saved my daughter. And anyone who kills Crossley scum can't be all bad. Yet Lola saw concern flicker in her father's eyes. He knew too well how a thirst for vengeance could consume a soul. The Crossleys had tried to break him by harming his only child, and he still trembled with fury. Then again, Randolph muttered, maybe we need him. Marshal Sutter's rumored to be unstoppable with eyes in half the counties around here. The Crossleys might just take advantage of that to get rid of both us and Gunnar. A thunderous boom echoed across the valley. Joshua rushed to the window and peered out. Down the road, half a dozen riders were visible in the moonlight. Torch flames danced against the silhouettes of men carrying guns. Crossley's men. Joshua breathed. They're heading for Townsend Acres. Randolph grabbed his rifle and barked orders, telling the ranch hands who had accompanied him into town to defend the property. Lola, he snapped, stay here with the doc until we know it's safe. But she set her jaw. She replied with unexpected steel in her voice. This is my fight as much as yours. They want me. Let them see I'm not cowering. Before Randolph could protest, the roar of gunfire rent the night. The riders were assaulting the ranch, likely aiming to draw Randolph out or, worse, flush out Gunnar Jameson if he was on the property. With no time to argue further, Lola armed herself with a spare Winchester. Pain lanced her side where bruises remained from the beating, but adrenaline propelled her forward. In the distance, she saw flickers of more torches and heard the squeal of animals panicked by the noise. The house, the barns, the entire Townsend spread was under siege. For a moment, she recalled that silent presence who rescued her at dawn and wondered if Gunnar was out there somewhere, watching from a vantage point or already intervening. Without warning, the saloon's doors slammed open and Sheriff Abbott emerged bleary-eyed and reeking of whiskey. What's all this ruckus? He demanded. You folks causing trouble? Lola's father bristled but forced himself to remain civil. Trouble? It's the Crossleys, Abbott, or are you conveniently ignoring that? The sheriff swayed slightly, scowling. It was no secret he was on the gang's payroll, and most of Brightwater expected no help from him. Maybe you brought this on yourself, Townsend. You keep pushing them. They're bound to push back. Let me handle it in the morning. Randolph cursed under his breath. By morning, we might all be dead. Do your job, but Abbott just shrugged, half-turned, and ambled back inside the saloon. That was all they needed to see. If they were going to survive, they couldn't rely on the sheriff's worthless help. The final flash Lola saw as they rode for the ranch was a reflection of gunfire against the swirling smoke. In the sky, she found herself praying for the ranch hands, for the good people of the valley, and for the silent man she suspected was out there in the darkness, holding back the worst of the Crossley onslaught. When they reached Townsend Acres, chaos had taken hold. Flames licked the edges of the barn, where a lantern had been hurled through a window, turning the wooden siding into a raging pyre. Randolph's hired hands crouched behind wagons, returning fire at the Crossley riders, who circled like wolves. Lola slid off her horse rifle in hand, her lungs seared with every breath, but she refused to be sidelined. Somewhere in the confusion, she heard Joshua shouting to regroup by the corral. A bullet whizzed past her ear, cracking against the stone water trough behind her. Another shot sent shards of wood flying from the barn door. She dropped low, scanning through the smoke for a sign of her father. There he was, near the burning barn, grappling with a Crossley thug. Randolph slammed the man into the barn wall, but at that same moment, a second attacker rushed him with a club. Lola aimed her Winchester carefully and fired the recoil, jolting her injured ribs. The second man went down with a howl, saving her father from what could have been a killing blow. Randolph shot her a grateful glance, then pulled himself free to take stock of the situation. The yard was awash in gunfire, flickering flames, and the screams of frightened horses. It was then Lola spotted him. Gunnar Jameson appearing through the smoke like a phantom. He moved with uncanny grace, weaving between streaks of bullets. His coat whipped behind him, revealing the butt of a revolver in each hand. She watched as he calmly dispatched two Crossley men who never even saw him coming. He reloaded in a heartbeat, eyes scanning for the next threat. Even in the bedlam, his face appeared remote, grimly focused. It struck Lola how little fear he seemed to have. He acted like a man who had lost everything and now lives solely for moments like this. At the far edge of the yard, a lantern's glow revealed a tall figure on horseback. Marcus Crossley himself, the man rumored to have orchestrated Lola's abduction. He raised his rifle, setting his sights on Gunner. Before Lola could shout a warning, a shot rang out from behind the ranch house. The bullet clipped Marcus's horse, which reared in panic, thwarting his aim. When the horse's hooves crashed down, Marcus snarled an order to his men. "Burn every building, kill anyone who stands in your way." A wave of panic rippled through the ranch hands, some of whom recognized the advantage Crossley had with his numbers. From the darkness, more riders joined the fray. At first, Lola feared they were reinforcements for the Crossleys, but she glimpsed a battered old cavalry coat among them. Dr. Whitaker and Lily had arrived with townspeople brave enough to ride under gunfire. They poured into the yard, shoring up Randolph's defensive line. The crack of rifles doubled as men from Brightwater took positions behind overturned wagons and the low stone walls. The tide was turning, or so it seemed, until the distinctive crack of a high-powered rifle silenced the field. A hush fell as a new voice rang out. "Gunner Jameson, I know you're here." All eyes turned to the flickering glow near the barn. There stood Marshal Sutter, flanked by a handful of men wearing tarnished badges. They were neither with the Crossleys nor against them exactly. They were after Gunner, 15 years, Jameson. Sutter shouted above the din. "I've followed your bloody trail across half a dozen states. Drop your guns and come out, or these ranch folks pay the price." The Crossleys hovered uncertainly, not sure if they wanted an alliance with Sutter or to exploit the confusion for themselves. Randolph bristled, but motioned for his people to hold their fire. Lola realized in that moment that Marshal Sutter was more dangerous than any ragtag group of outlaws. He carried the authority of the federal government, albeit corruptly, to back him up. When Gunner stepped forward, the yard seemed to tense as one. He still held his revolvers at his sides, his posture unthreatening but poised to fight. For the first time, Lola heard him speak. "Badge," he rasped, pointing at the tarnished star pinned to Sutter's vest. His voice sounded raw, like it hadn't been used in a very long time. Sutter sneered, "You want my badge?" Then he laughed, a harsh, humorless bark. "Only a madman hunts federal lawmen. Like you've done, Jameson. You think you can take me down the way you took down Sheriff Abbott's friends in Broken Mesa?" That name, Broken Mesa, hung in the air like a curse. Lola had heard rumors from Joshua, but hearing it now on Sutter's lips made everything real. Her gaze shot to Gunner, who stood quiet as stone. A single shot split the night, fired by Sutter's right-hand man. Gunner dove behind a stack of crates, returning fire with lethal accuracy. Randolph and the others seized the moment to renew their own assault on the Crossley gang, who found themselves trapped between the ranch's defenders and Sutter's men. Sparks flew as bullets ricocheted off metal and stone, and the barn's blaze intensified, showering the yard with burning embers. The acrid smell of smoke mingled with the metallic tang of blood. Lola, despite her bruises, kept her focus on the swirling chaos. She had a line of sight on Marcus Crossley's white horse galloping in confused circles. She also had a glimpse of Sutter's position near the barn's open door. Bracing the Winchester against her shoulder, she narrowed her eye at Marcus. He'd nearly killed her father. He'd orchestrated her abduction. Now he was turning Randolph's land into a battlefield. Heart pounding, she squeezed the trigger. Her bullet found its mark, catching Marcus in the arm. He let out a roar of pain, dropping his rifle. Before she could fire again, two of his men rushed to pull him to safety. The yard was a swirling tapestry of muzzle flashes and frantic shouts. Too many targets to keep track of. In the midst of it all, Marshal Sutter kept bellowing for Gunner to surrender. "You can't keep running from Broken Mesa, Jameson. That ghost died long ago." The words echoed strangely over the din. Lola thought she saw Gunner's shoulders tense, as if stricken by an old wound. Memories or regrets she couldn't tell, but no fear showed on his face. Instead, his expression hardened into something akin to defiance or maybe inevitability. Meanwhile, Dr. Whitaker and Lily were doing their best to drag wounded men out of the line of fire. Each time Lily emerged from behind a wagon to pull a fallen ranch hand to safety, Lola's heart lurched, fearing another bullet would find them. Yet they persisted, forging a narrow path to the clinic wagon. Randolph, still seething with rage, found a vantage point on the roof of a small shed, picking off Crossley men. One by one, Joshua West hopped onto a nearby water trough to do the same. The defenders had turned the ranch yard into a fortress. A lull in the shooting came when the flames from the barn roared high, forcing everyone to shift positions. Gunner stepped from behind his cover, his gaze fixed on Sutter. If the marshal's star glinted ominously in the firelight, Gunner's eyes glowed with an equally fierce intensity. Without lowering his gun, he announced, "Cole Abbott Niles. 3 badges you swore to protect Sutter, but you sold them instead." The hush was palpable. Sutter's men exchanged uneasy glances, and the Crossleys realized they were caught in a fight bigger than a simple land dispute. "What do you know?" Sutter spat, though his voice wavered. "You're a murderer wanted in 5 territories for killing those men in cold blood." Gunner lifted a hand to his throat, revealing an old scar just above his shirt collar. "They tied my family to posts, burned our home. A lawman let it happen." His words were raw, scraping the air. Lola's throat tightened. She remembered how she felt bound to that fence post, convinced she would die alone. The thought of an entire family suffering that fate made her want to retch. Sutter recovered quickly, giving a mocking grin. "Whatever happened then is done. You can't bring them back by spilling more blood, but you sure as hell can hang for it." He waved a hand at the Crossleys. "If the rest of you want a piece of the bounty on Jameson, step right up." The Crossley men, battered but still cunning, weighed their odds. Marcus Crossley was wounded and they were pinned. If turning on Gunner earned them a chance to live and collect money, they might take it. Lola saw the flicker of greed in their eyes. "Don't," Randolph shouted, leveling his rifle at the nearest Crossley rider. "If you side with him, you'll answer to all of us." A standoff followed the night split by the roar of the blazing barn and the anguished whinnies of terrified horses. Smoke choked the air, searing lungs. Finally, the Crossleys backed down, many dropping their guns. They seemed more intent on saving their own skins than joining Sutter's madness. Sutter barked curses as his last few loyal men raised their weapons. Gunner stared them down, unwavering. What followed was a sudden blitz of violence as Sutter's men realized they were outnumbered and decided to go down fighting. The flash of gunfire lit the yard like lightning, sending shadows leaping across the ground. A bullet grazed Joshua West's shoulder, knocking him off the water trough with a yelp. Another round struck a ranch hand in the leg, sending him collapsing to the dirt. But the defenders, Townsend men, local volunteers, even a few Crossleys who'd had a change of heart, let loose a volley of return shots that felled 2 of Sutter's men in seconds. Marshal Sutter himself, however, was not so easily pinned down. He dived behind the protection of a stone feed store attached to the barn, snapping off a shot that splintered the railing where Lola crouched. She hit the deck as wood chips rained around her. Gunner advanced, weaving through the rubble, forcing Sutter deeper into the property. Randolph, seeing an opening, signaled for the able-bodied men to flank Sutter on both sides. Lily Whitaker crawled through the chaos, dragging a wounded ranch hand behind her. In the smoke-filled air, Lola caught glimpses of Joshua West pressing a rag to his bleeding shoulder, still mustering enough resolve to line up another shot. Finally, Randolph and 2 of his ranch hands cornered Sutter near a half-collapsed wagon. "You're done," Randolph thundered. "Get out of my land, or we end you here." Sutter merely smiled a twisted grin. "You think you can hold me? I am the law. Or close enough that nobody will question me when I say you resisted arrest." He feigned surrender for a moment, only to whip out a second pistol from under his coat. One of Randolph's men took a bullet to the chest before Gunner Jameson lunged from the side, delivering a savage blow that knocked Sutter's aim wide. They crashed into the scorched earth, grappling for control of the gun. In that moment, Lola saw a third figure appear out of the swirling haze. Marcus Crossley dismounted and reeling from his earlier wound, but weapon still in hand. He aimed squarely at Gunner's back as Gunner wrestled Sutter to the ground. Lola didn't think. She just fired. The bullet struck home and Marcus collapsed with a strangled cry. For a heartbeat, her world went silent. She'd shot him, killed him most likely. The man who'd orchestrated her torment and threatened her family was finally down. She felt a strange mix of triumph and horror thrashing in her stomach. Seizing the distraction, Sutter threw Gunner off and staggered to his feet. Before the marshal could flee, Gunner righted himself. With measured calm, Gunner drew his revolver once more and fired. The shot tore through Sutter's side, spinning him around. He sank to his knees in the dirt, disbelief etched on his face. Gunner rose, chest, heaving, eyes locked on his old foe. "Broken Mesa," he said, voice a rasp. "Justice for them, for my wife, my daughter." The final bullet brought an end to Sutter's twisted reign. He toppled over, mouth opening in a silent snarl as he bled into the ground he'd tried to rule. When the echo of gunfire faded, the ranch was a ruin of flame, and smoke scattered with the wounded and dead. Lola leaned against the shattered railing, trembling. Randolph rushed to her side and wrapped her in a fierce embrace, checking her injuries with worried eyes. Gunner stood near Sutter's body, gaze distant and shoulders slumped, as though the last 15 years of his life had culminated in this single moment of violence. Lily and Dr. Whitaker re-emerged, guiding a group of dazed survivors away from the smoke. Even some of the Crossley men, those who had surrendered, looked relieved at the downfall of their leader. Word spread quickly among the battered defenders. Marcus Crossley was done, Marshal Sutter was dead, and Sheriff Abbott was likely nowhere to be seen. A hush settled on Townsend Acres as the dawn light crept over the horizon, illuminating the devastation. The barn was a smoking husk, the ground littered with bullet shells and wreckage. Yet in that stillness, the weight of what had transpired began to lift. The tyranny that had long terrorized Brightwater Valley had finally met its match. As morning fully broke, the survivors tended to the aftermath. Dr. Whitaker and Lily triaged the injured on the lawn, tearing old sheets into bandages and dispensing what medical supplies remained. Joshua West, his shoulder bandaged, helped line up the bodies of the fallen, treating even the Crossley dead with a certain solemn respect. Randolph Townsend, leaning on a rifle, surveyed the charred remains of his barn. It hurt him to see a piece of his family's livelihood reduced to ash, but the knowledge that Lola was alive, battered, but standing, offered a sense of gratitude he hadn't felt in ages. He approached her and laid a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I owe that man a debt," he said, nodding toward Gunnar Jameson, who was methodically digging graves near the far fence. "He saved you. Saved all of us, really." Though battered, Olola found the strength to assist with the makeshift funeral rites. She limped over to the edge of the yard where Gunnar toiled. His silence was back, as though each strike of the shovel into the hard Wyoming earth sealed off another piece of his heart. Sheriff Abbott's body was nowhere to be found. Likely he'd vanished into the night, or maybe ended up among the nameless casualties. None of the townsfolk seemed inclined to track him down. Once the holes were dug, Gunnar carried each body himself, placing them gently into the ground. He even carved small wooden markers from fence posts, one for each. When he came to Marshal Sutter, he paused and glanced at the tarnished star still pinned to the corpse's vest. The survivors gathered for a brief service. Dr. Whitaker spoke words of committal for the fallen, while Lily sang a short hymn, her sweet voice wavering in the wind. Lola noted that though several of the Crossleys lay in those graves, no one spat curses at them now. The finality of the moment was too raw, too heavy. One by one, ranch hands and townsfolk trickled back toward the battered homestead, leaving only Lola Randolph and Gunnar by the graves. She saw Gunnar remove the star from Sutter's vest and drop it into the open grave with a soft clink. She realized it wasn't an act of respect, but rather a final condemnation. A silent statement that such a badge, tainted by corruption, had no place above ground. In the days that followed, a strange calm descended on Brightwater. With the Crossley gang decimated and Marshal Sutter gone, the valley was free of its most corrupt influences. Townspeople ventured beyond their front doors without the constant shadow of extortion and violence. Randolph petitioned the territorial governor, sending word via telegram that a new era of law was needed. A response came sooner than expected, promising swift action to restore order and justice to the region. Late one evening, Randolph approached Gunnar, who was polishing the revolvers that had seen him through the bloody confrontation I heard back from Cheyenne. Randolph said quietly, "They're aware of the vacuum here. Sheriff Abbott's vanished, no real authority remains, and there's talk of appointing a new lawman to keep the peace." "I told them about you." Gunnar lifted his gaze. For once he seemed uncertain. "A star," he said hoarsely, words still foreign on his tongue. "I wore one a long time ago." Randolph slowly nodded. "They want a good man, one who won't look the other way, one who doesn't bow to bribery. You might be the only man with the nerve and skill to handle these parts." Across the room, Lola watched the exchange, heart thrumming with hope. She recalled the moment Gunnar saved her life, the silent resolve that had guided his every step, since if anyone deserved a second chance at being the law, it was him. Yet she also sensed the weight of his grief and the price he'd paid in blood over the last 15 years. Whether he would accept or turn his back on such a symbol again remained an open question. A week later, Randolph Townsend, Lola, and a handful of townsfolk gathered in front of Brightwater's old municipal building. It had once served as a courthouse, but that function had long been neglected under Sheriff Abbott's lazy watch. Now the territorial governor himself had sent an official representative, a stern woman named Agatha Helmwood, who arrived on a stagecoach with a shining new badge. Townspeople lined the dusty street, curious about what might happen. Among the crowd, Whitaker and Lily stood close by, Lily waving the cast on her arm from a run-in during the battle. Joshua West nudged Lola, whispering, "Reckon he'll show." As if on cue, Gunnar Jameson rode in, still astride the horse he'd used the morning he rescued Lola. He dismounted, his steps slow and resolute, until he stood before the makeshift podium erected for the day's ceremony. Agatha Helmwood, noticing the hush that fell, coughed politely and introduced herself. I represent Governor Norwood. We've heard of your valor, Mr. Jameson. Also your complicated history. She paused, lips pursing as if weighing her words. We believe the territory stands at a crossroads. We cannot allow criminals and corrupt officials to fill the vacuum left by the Crossleys and Marshal Sutter. Therefore, by the power vested in me, I'm authorized to offer you the position of Territorial Marshal for the Brightwater region. A ripple of surprise and relief passed through the gathered crowd. Randolph Townsend exchanged a glance with Lola, who sensed both pride and apprehension in her father's eyes. This was truly an unorthodox solution, everyone present knew. Gunnar Jameson had a darker past, yet they also realized no one else had risked everything to rid them of Crossley tyranny. Agatha extended the shining badge. Gunnar looked at it as though it were alive. Coal memories flickered behind his eyes, grief, guilt, anger, and perhaps a glimmer of hope. Then with a steadying breath, he reached out and accepted it. You accept? Agatha asked in a formal tone. Gunnar nodded once, his voice still rough from disuse carried through the still air. I do. Applause erupted more from relief than celebration. Over by the clinic wagon, Dr. Whitaker dabbed his eyes and Lily let out a cheer. Joshua West whooped loudly, smacking the brim of his hat against his thigh. Even the stoic ranch hands cracked small smiles. Lola caught sight of an older woman leaning against a cane, tears in her eyes, murmuring that she never thought the day would come when the law in Brightwater actually meant something good. After the ceremony, Agatha addressed the crowd about immediate plans for order, establishing a legitimate courthouse, reassigning or dismissing any remnants of Abbott's corrupt department, and organizing volunteers to patrol the region. We cannot rewrite the past, Agatha said, but we can chart a new future, one where badges stand for law and not for private agendas. She turned to Gunnar politely, bowing her head. Marshal Jameson, you have your work cut out for you. Gunnar eyed the star pinned to his chest. There's more to do, he said, voice rasping with the unfamiliar usage. He glanced at Lola, who wore a look of quiet determination. She understood she had her own role to play. The Crossleys might be broken, but their remnants or other opportunists would try to fill the void. Later, in a quieter moment, she approached him. I'd like to help, she said simply. I've got reason enough to hate what these gangs do. I know how to shoot, and we'll need more than one badge for a valley this size. Gunnar looked at her with a softness she hadn't seen before. Your father, he asked. He'll fret, Lola admitted, but he knows I can handle myself. Besides, you saved me once upon a time. Now it's my turn to save others. A faint trace of a smile flickered across Gunnar's weathered features. In the weeks that followed, Brightwater saw a transformation. With Marshal Jameson at the helm and Deputy Lola Townsend by his side, the town's law enforcement was rebuilt from the ground up. The old municipal building reopened as a functional courthouse. Dr. Whitaker donated a portion of his storehouse to serve as a small infirmary beside the jail cells. Lily painted fresh signage for the office doors. Randolph Townsend, though reluctant to let Lola face danger, took pride in seeing her newfound resolve. He used his influence among the ranchers to rally support for the new regime. Donations of lumber nails and manpower flowed in, and burned buildings, like Randolph's own barn, were replaced with sturdier structures. Joshua West proved invaluable as well. He offered intelligence on the leftover Crossley riders who'd fled the final firefight. Some had drifted into the hills, others to neighboring counties, hoping to avoid capture. But with a legitimate marshal in place, they found themselves tracked down systematically. Lola sometimes felt a pang of worry that Gunnar's vigilant methods might revert to the lethal patterns he'd used for so many years. Yet he surprised her time and again with restraint. Where possible, he brought in fugitives alive. It was as though wearing the star again had rekindled a sense of duty he thought lost in the ashes of Broken Mesa. One day they got word that an entire group of orphaned children from the Crossleys' old territory would be arriving in Brightwater. Their parents had perished in a wave of violence orchestrated by the gang. Randolph, remembering the heartbreak of losing Lola's mother years ago, albeit to illness, not outlaw brutality, suggested converting a portion of the abandoned Crossley ranch house into a haven for these children. The idea caught on. Soon plans were drawn up to repurpose the place into a small orphanage. Even a few reformed Crossley men, disillusioned by the gang's brutality, agreed to help rebuild for the sake of the kids. It amazed Lola to watch a building once used for oppression transform into something that symbolized fresh starts. In the midst of these changes, Lola and Gunnar rarely spoke of the past, but sometimes in the still of the evening, she'd catch him polishing a small photograph. She'd never intrude on his privacy, but one time she glimpsed the image, a woman and a young girl both smiling. She understood these must have been his wife and daughter, the family stolen from him at Broken Mesa. Dr. Whitaker had uncovered hints of the tragedy in old telegrams and files that linked Marshall Sutter and certain outlaw gangs to the atrocity. Now that Sutter was dead, justice of a sort had been served, but no settlement or new badge could bring Gunner's family back. Yet life moved forward. Each dawn, Lola awoke to the clang of the blacksmith's hammer, a comforting sound that signaled progress. Children dashed along Brightwater's main street, free of the fear that once lurked at every corner. The general store bustled with trade no longer under threat of extortion. Even the saloon whose old owner had shady ties took on new life under management by folks who believed in fairness. At times, Lola worried it was all too good to be true, that a new menace would appear. But as the weeks marched on, the valley's sense of peace deepened, buoyed by the knowledge that genuine law, not corruption, watched over them. Eventually, talk turned to expanding that sense of protection beyond Brightwater. Neighboring towns, hearing of the Crossley downfall and the stand taken by Marshall Jameson, petitioned for help cleaning up their own crooked lawmen or bandit troubles. Each request came with an undercurrent of relief that a man of honor wore the star rather than an opportunistic puppet. On one such evening, as Lola scribbled notes on new warrants at the deputy's desk, Gunner paused in the doorway. "Riders from the south. Need help with stolen cattle," he said. She looked up with a small smile. "Guess we ride at dawn then?" He nodded, and for a moment the ghost of a grin lit his features. The day arrived for the first group of orphans to move into the refurbished Crossley Ranch, now called New Horizon. Home Lola rode out with a wagon full of supplies, accompanied by Lily Whitaker. As they approached the gate, they noticed a changed atmosphere. Where once guards might have stood sneering, now men and women hammered boards and laid bricks to ensure the old structure could host the youngsters. Joshua West supervised, rolling up his sleeves alongside ranch hands from towns and acres who volunteered for the project. Piles of donated furniture and children's clothing lay sorted under a canvas awning. Lola found a quiet corner of what had been the main parlor, now transformed into a dining hall, and placed the bundles of bedding she'd brought. A flurry of commotion announced the stagecoach's arrival. Dr. Whitaker helped the children disembark, each carrying a few keepsakes or ragged dolls. For a moment, the place filled with hushed voices and anxious eyes. But Lily, always motherly, despite her youth, welcomed them with open arms, guiding them to meet some of the folks who'd look after them. Randolph Townsend, leaning on his cane, a souvenir of the bullet wound he had received, gave a gentle smile to a wide-eyed little boy clutching a broken wooden train. "Not much of a fix," Randolph said, "but if you stay here a spell, I'll see about getting that train back on track." A hush fell suddenly, and then Lola turned to see Gunner Jameson standing in the doorway. He still wore his duster, the bright new Marshall's star gleaming. For a beat, the children stared, seeming to sense the gravity in him. Then a small girl no older than 5 toddled up and tugged on the hem of his coat, wordlessly seeking comfort. Gunner's stoic face softened as he gently placed a hand on her shoulder. Something about that moment, where vengeance gave way to caregiving, spoke volumes about the new direction the valley was taking. Dr. Whitaker caught Lola's eye and nodded in silent approval. Outside, beneath a swaying cottonwood tree, Gunner and Lola later found a moment to talk. The children's laughter floated out from the newly christened dining hall, and the sky shimmered with the gold of late afternoon. Gunner reached into his coat, producing a fresh wooden carving, a small horse with a tiny rider meticulously detailed. He handed it to Lola, who turned it over in her hands. "For you," he said quietly. "The first day I saw you tied to that fence post, you reminded me." He trailed off, but Lola guessed he was remembering his daughter, perhaps her determined spirit. Tears stung her eyes as she held the carving close. "You've given this valley hope," she replied. "And me too." He nodded. "We both did," he corrected. She studied his lined face, the same man who had once been silent, consumed by a 15-year-old agony. Now he spoke with quiet conviction, continuing the mission he'd started the day he cut her free. She heard the distant whistle of a train, something new and revitalizing, heralding more settlers or supplies. The future beckoned from beyond the mountains, and for once, the valley was prepared to meet it without fear. Their conversation was cut short by a rider galloping in from Brightwater. "Marshal Deputy," the rider called breathlessly, "wagon of stolen goods, spotted up north near Bridger's Pass. Some folks suspect it's a fresh gang trying to fill the Crossley's shoes." Lola met Gunner's gaze, her fingers closing around the tiny wooden horse. He gave a curt nod. Duty called within minutes, they were mounted up. Randolph offering a last wave, a mixture of pride and apprehension on his face. The pair rode out, dust trailing behind their horses, as they headed toward the ridges and valleys where outlaws once reigned. But this time justice rode with them, wearing a star untarnished by bribes and a spirit unbound by fear. As they disappeared into the shifting light of the setting sun, the final echoes of the old tyranny faded. Brightwater stood strong, towns and acres rebuilding the children, settling into a home that promised them a future free from terror. Perhaps Lola thought it was fitting that two people who began their story with ropes and silence should continue it astride horses, speaking for those who had none, so the valley's story unspooled. One of battered survivors, forging unity from tragedy, building a land where the law was truly the law. Gunnar Jameson, once a silent ghost of vengeance, now stood as the voice of renewed hope. And Lola Townsend, no longer a rancher's helpless daughter, but a deputy with a mission, carried her scars like badges of honor, determined to safeguard a valley that had given her a reason to stand tall and ride free under the endless Wyoming sky. Looking back, it's clear this story isn't just about revenge or bloodshed. It's about the victory of hope over despair. A determined young woman rose from helpless victim to deputy lawkeeper, and a silent wanderer found his voice again by defending what was right. In standing together, they proved that no matter how deep past traumas run, justice and compassion can triumph. Families were reunited, and an orphanage was built, and a lawless land found the seeds of peace it had always deserved. To me, it's a powerful reminder that we all have the ability to heal from our own scars and from the wounds of a broken community. If we come together with open hearts, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What moments stood out to you the most? Share your opinions in the comments below, and let's keep this conversation going.